I'm the hormone specialist, pharmacist Lane Kilpatrick, and this is you, Chief Medical Officer. Welcome to the podcast. My guest and your advisor today is medical anthropologist and investigative journalist Scott Carney. It doesn't take a long conversation with him to see that he loves both. And the New York Times Best Seller status of his book, What Doesn't Kill Us, proves he's good at it. The book's a first-hand examination of the methods of one Wim Hof, a Dutch guru of extreme cold exposures and accessing powers of adaption that lie within all of us but have gone largely dormant with the modern-day comforts we clever humans have secured for ourselves. But the technique is not without risk. Scott has just revealed for the first time some newly emerging evidence that the practice can go tragically wrong. What I like about Scott is he breaks down this concept of hormesis in human physiology with the clarity of a skilled journalist, but the spell of a good storyteller, things we could use a lot more of in science education. I think you'll find his humor and energy are infectious. Scott's definitely more the Indiana Jones anthropologist rather than academic. He's going to love me for that. Never one to study his subject by passive observation, his style's complete immersion and full participation, which makes for some really interesting material. So let's get to it. All right, Scott, welcome to Utah, man.
Thank you so much. It's so beautiful here. Like, these mountains are epic.
They are. They're nice. You leave here and you really miss them. I feel really lucky that we were able to corner you here while you're in town for a speaking engagement. So thank you for this opportunity. I feel like you're a little unique in that your credentials of investigative journalist, but combined with a background and a degree, master's degree, am I right?
Yeah, I'm technically ABD in anthropology, which means everything but the dissertation. So I got to the dissertation's moment, started working on it, and then I dropped out of the program because I wanted more than 5 people to read my work.
Okay, but medical anthropology. So there's a unique mix there that I feel like there's a huge role for a journalist in this discussion, because we are so bad as medical people at communicating things clearly and concisely so that the average Joe and Jane can understand it and apply it. So I really am glad that you've got that background. I think it's interesting. So you researched and wrote a book called What Doesn't Kill Us. That's perhaps a cliched title, but...
Well, Nietzsche came up with it, right? So that which does not kill us makes us stronger.
Right. Yeah, there's more to it. But it really actually isn't, because usually people that say that really don't mean what doesn't kill us. You literally do.
Yes.
I mean, there's a warning at the beginning of the book, and let me just read it. This book is intended to be a journalistic investigation into the limits and possibilities of the human body. No one should attempt any of these methods or practices without appropriate experience, training, fitness level, doctor approval, and supervision. And even then, readers must be aware that these practices are inherently dangerous and could result in grave harm or death.
Absolutely. And it's a big black warning. I mean, it says warning over it. It's like a major pharmaceutical made of acid. And yes, I mean, these things are potentially dangerous, but also, at the same time, everything is potentially dangerous. And I think one of the big messages in the book is that if you don't take risks, if you don't do things that are potentially dangerous, then what are you doing? What is your goal of being alive, right? Like, if we know that this whole game of life that we are living in ends if it's in death, and if you think that life were a song, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that song ends in a minor key. And we know that this is not going to be a good ending, probably. given that understanding, it is my belief that that obligates us and frees us to live as big and wonderful a life as possible. It frees us to take risks. It frees us to fail sometimes, because you're never going to fail worse than the game we already lost, which is life, which ends in death.
Which ends in death, and sadly sometimes in just terrible debilitation, or
Sure.
in a I guess there's some things worse than death. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's a really good point. And that's why when we take risks, we have to take smart risks.
Mm-hmm.
You have to take risks in a way that, is this worth it to do? And so there's a calculation, like if I'm going to do something which is dangerous, and I have lived a life which has put me in danger on many, many occasions,
Mm-hmm.
and yet I don't like skiing. Okay, because I'm skiing, I'm like, well, that was a useless death. I hit a tree. Whereas if I'm doing something where I'm going to interview a warlord in central India, or I'm going to climb Mount Kilimanjaro in a bathing suit, which is sort of how What Doesn't Kill Us ends.
All of which you've done.
And these things, I find that they're risks because they shed light on something that's fundamentally human.
What does it leave me with, rather than just an adrenaline junkie kind of experience?
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. I agree. It's so what we're going to talk about today is this subject of hormesis, and why don't you just define that for folks?
So hormesis is the idea that actually there's several ways to define hormesis. The one of the studies would say, if you take something, a little bit of poison, you will respond by at first having an increase in all of your vital signs. Everything gets better when you have a little bit of stress coming into your system. And then there's a dosage at which that stress then becomes toxic and kills you. And so some of the amazing studies on hormesis was like on bird eggs. And I think they dosed these bird eggs with arsenic, and more bird eggs hatched with a little bit of arsenic. And they had more vital birds. The birds were stressed at birth, and then they grew up and hatched more frequently when they were given a little of arsenic. But when you gave them a little more arsenic, all of the birds died. So it's about finding the stress which enlivens you versus the stress that kills you. And that's that delicate balance that we are playing with here.
I remember being a kid and, having that experience at home where you have some bird eggs and you're waiting for them to hatch. And then, of course, I want to help it. And mom says, no. They have to go through that to be strong enough to survive. Right. So kind of same idea, maybe, I guess.
Yeah, actually, I mean, that's a good thing. So with the bird eggs, if they don't, they're pecking out. And if you just open up the shell, there's something about the act of breaking open that shell and pushing out themselves, which is a stress which looks very hard for the bird. But if you don't go through that stress, you don't. I mean, I don't know what birds learn. I've never actually hatched from an egg, but I'm assuming that there's something in that process that enlivens you, that stress then imprints your life as you go forward. And, it's, I don't know if you've read or watched the movie The Princess Bride. Another case of hormesis is iocane powder, a fake poison, right? He takes just a little bit of iocane powder his whole life, and then he's immune from iocane powder. This is actually a physiological process that you can do with other poisons. I don't know why you do it, but you could do it, right? Where you take a little bit of cyanide, just a tiny, like an apple seed of cyanide. And maybe there's a way you could build up to an immunity to cyanide. And the idea with hormesis is that, and that's not medical advice, just so you know. That's not medical advice.
Yeah, thank
you. But the idea with hormesis is some of these stressors are tonal to your whole body, right? Some of these stressors, when you get the stress, it's not just like the iocane powder that you might get immunity to, but it's like everything gets better. Your whole system comes up at once, which is why the Wim Hof Method, and what I've studied for 10 years with him, is getting into ice water. Your whole body responds to the sensation of death, because ice water is death as far as your nervous system is concerned. We are primed to look at the death. And when you can sit in that ice water, in the sensation of death, and you can say, instead of, oh my God, this is the worst thing in the world, instead of that, if you just said, actually, it's okay. it's okay. That sensation on my skin and this ice water isn't death. It's actually enlivening me. You have all of a sudden, you're speaking in the language of your nervous system, and you are changing the way your body responds to external stimulus and the stimulus of death itself. And that has huge anti-anxiety effects, right? Because anxiety is usually ultimately the fear of death, right? Antidepressive effects and autoimmune effects. So it helps autoimmune illnesses because you're speaking to your body and your physiology in the language that it understands, which is the language of sensation.
And resistance resistance is not a new concept to most people. They understand how it works in muscle and bone strength. But this, so you brought up Wim Hof, and that's what a lot of your book focuses in on and centers in on, and it's interesting because his is a little bit unconventional and takes it to, shall we say, another level that some thought not possible, really, and yet he was doing these things. So let's just kind of get into that. Okay, maybe you can just sort of in summary form talk about the method.
Sure,
you feel all right doing that?
Sure. So the Wim Hof method is it has essentially 3 pillars to it, which is cold exposure, breathwork patterns, and what is sort of an ill-defined concept called mindset, which it's understandable once you start doing the practices. I like to think of it as a meditation. I like to think of it that as a meditation which is physically based. So if you think about a meditative practice, right? You think about the monk sitting cross-legged in the mountains in India, right? You think of meditation as a calming of your senses and yourself as you turn inwards. The interesting thing about the Wim Hof method, which is also a sort of meditation, is that it's very externally stimulated. So that you put yourself in an environment, as in the cold water, or you create an internal environment vis-a-vis hyperventilation that looks like a panic attack. And then in that stimulus, you tell yourself that you can be calm in those external stimuli. And when those add up together, that creates this ability to speak to your internal systems. And this is a concept that I call the wedge. And I wrote a follow-up book to What Doesn't Kill Us, which is basically, if you've been doing the Wim Hof method for 10 years, where else can we apply it outside of ice water and breath work? And
which is important to people because this isn't just about enduring
ice water. Who cares?
Yeah, exactly. Like I said, an adrenaline pursuit of a thrill.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a really good point because from the outside, it looks like these feats are superhuman. It looks like they're really big events that look good on Instagram, right?
Right, which they do, and that sort of is how he was, shall we say, pigeonholed early on, right, in his career. It was about
stunts.
Yeah, a little bit of a Carney act, if you'll forgive the.
Oh, I love that. Totally a Carney act.
Thank you. Sideshow kind of thing,
Right, and I think that this is where so I was the first serious journalist to write about Wim Hof. Now, there had been articles where he was a carnival act, like he hung from a balloon by one finger. He swam under ice. He did some mountaineering stuff. And so he was on the sort of circus act TV stuff. When I heard about him, I had just written a book on essentially cult psychology and how the pursuit of superpowers can lead to very bad outcomes. And I just, I'd seen people die on meditation retreats in the pursuit of superpowers. I'd written a book about a man who meditated to death on the side of a mountain. I was really into this question of what is it about spiritual pursuits can drive you insane, and also the charismatic cult leader who enables that. So I heard about Wim and I was like, this guy's one of these charlatan gurus and I'm going to go after him and stop him before he gets too big. So I flew out to Poland. I met him. It was the very first official training session that he ever gave publicly. And there were 3 people there, including me, who signed up to go to this thing. And I was with Playboy magazine. And I came in there with this anthropological look. I'm going to go, the method for anthropology is called participant observation, which means you put yourself in the scene. You don't just sit out like a scientist in a white lab coat and watch. So I decided to do his practice. And the thing that amazed me is that I came with this idea to disprove him. And then in a week's time, I was doing the same feats that he could do, which was holding my breath for like 3 minutes at a time, doing more. I doubled the amount of push-ups I could do after just one breathing method. And I was like meditating on the banks of this river while there was steam come wafting up off me. And then I climbed up a mountain basically in my underwear while it was, I believe it was 2 degrees Fahrenheit. And I was warm. And I was like, wow, the question is, are these superpowers, or are they human powers? And as somebody who has a scientific bent to me, these things are things that evolution has given us. And so when I wrote this article, it was incredibly laudatory towards Wim because this method worked. It works. It still works. And for anyone who's like following me these days, you might see that I have some different impressions about how the method has transformed over 10 years. But the efficacy is real.
And the rapidity that it takes effect is, I think, it also sets it apart and is surprising to most people, because if you think of, and it's easy to think of Wim Hof as just a genetic aberration. And then when you see that, wow, I can do this, and not only can I do it, but in a short time, that's amazing.
Yeah, and the thing is, the thing about evolution, which was so amazing, is that its process was reproduction and death, right? You made an offspring, and then over time, some offsprings made it because of because they had good genetics and good luck and a good environment that they were in, and some offspring didn't because they had bad luck, bad genetics, or bad other things. And so death was the crucible by which organisms emerged on Earth over the course of multicellular life is about 1 billion years, and single cellular is about 3 billion years on Earth. Over the course of that time, death is the crucible by which we evolve. And here's the thing about our very advanced multicellular form that we live in, is that if you are not able to adapt to the environment quickly, you will die. And
likely before you're able to reproduce and pass on those genes.
Exactly. If the caveman who's looking out over the plains of I don't know where he is. He's in the Alps, and he's looking at, and there's a snowstorm coming. He's not like, well, I'll get ready for that snowstorm next week. No, you get ready now. And before technology, and we've had fire for quite a long time, even before Homo sapiens, us. But nonetheless, we didn't have much technology, and the more important technology they had was our bodies, the resilience of our bodies, the automatic responses of our bodies that were given to us by evolution, and our consciousness that said, let's do something with this, right? Because consciousness is important. It gives us, our bodies can do a lot automatically, but at some point they can't, and which is why I believe that we are conscious, is because at some point the body's like, well, I can't deal with a snowstorm. Let's create a great brain. Let's create decision-making capabilities, and that can involve running away from that snowstorm and making a really nice cave, or it can go get into that snowstorm and heat our bodies with our minds.
Okay, so to that point, what guys like Wim Hof espouse is, so what we've done is we actually did go away and make a warmer cave.
Yeah.
And we've so effectively insulated ourselves from the effects of the environment that now we've softened and become unable to really kind of meet these challenges anymore.
Yeah, our whole lifestyle since probably, I'd say since the beginning of 1900, but we can go back further if we want to. It's been this progressive narrowing of the range in which we inhabit comfortably. And if we looked at just temperature, mean temperatures in houses, and I cite the exact figures in my book, and I'm probably gonna get them off a little bit, but the mean indoor temperature of a house in Europe in the 1800s, I believe, was around 62 degrees. Now, the mean temperature is 72. That's actually accurate right now. And it's just because it's only a flip of a button. The person in the 1800s had to cut the wood and then fix the stove and all of those processes. And it was just easier to say, like, no, we're going to be comfortable at 62. And this drive that we have towards comfort narrows our environmental range, right? It narrows our environmental range. And then it says that we're actually not comfortable anywhere. Everything looks hard. So the Wim Hof Method is the marquee thing is the ice bath. And every person who looks at an ice bath, including me, including Wim Hof, they look at an ice bath and they're like, oh no. No. And me, I've been doing this for 10 years. I have an ice bath. I have like a stupidly advanced ice bath. And I look at it and I'm like, why do I have to be the ice bath guy? Right? Still think that.
So you still don't run towards it with open arms and, oh, I can't wait to get in.
Not the moment I look at it, no. And I think actually that's really important because we do have this internal sense of anxiety. And I use that term very broadly right now. It's just this idea of like, oh, I don't want to do it, right? Oh, I don't want to do it. I know I can do it, but I don't want to do it. But once you get over it, and after 3 seconds in an ice bath, I'm like, oh, right. Yeah, this is fine. I get it. No big deal. But there's still that little hump. And I think getting over that hump is actually a very deep practice. It's really, really magical to just like make that tiny little flip, and it changes your entire outlook on the day and on life in general. And I hope it never gets truly easy.
Oh, we don't see it as tiny and little. I think that's the problem from the start. You talked to a guy that was a former NASA scientist. What was his name? Ray
Kronze.
Ray Kronze. And he had a great quote in the book that you put in there. It says that the only two animals in the world that suffer chronic obesity are humans and the pets we keep at home.
I know, those little sausage dogs that we have.
Oh my
their
gosh.
Heads are tiny and their bodies are huge. How did we make that? That was a wolf. That was a wolf at one point.
Yeah, right? And look what we've turned it into. Well, that separate from the environment. And I think the pets I'm so glad he added that part on because so that's something we have full control over.
Mm-hmm.
Food, environment, warmth, where they sleep, how much they sleep all day long. And look what we've turned them into. It doesn't appear to be a particularly healthy way to evolve.
No, and humans in general, look at the obesity rates in America. Like our comfort has made us like perfect for sofas, perfect for Netflix, perfect for driving in an oversized SUV, perfect for having a cup that is 8 times the size of a cup we used to have. Like our bodies become the environment in which we inhabit. You put a goldfish in I think might be wrong, but you put a goldfish in a big pond, it gets really, really big, right? And to realizing that there's that relationship between the environment and our bodies is critical. And realizing that we as humans have this predilection and this addiction to comfort. And it's really hard to counteract that because in our evolutionary past, comfort was never the norm, right? You were the caveman, you're Thor or Thug or whatever his name was. And you're looking at the mountain and your chances you're like, oh man, there's a snowstorm. He's like, this is going to be a crappy day, but I have to get over that mountain. And the comfort at the end was when he got to curl up under a tree with a grass mat over him. He's like, this is snuggly. And that was great for him. He dropped all of this dopamine and these hormones that were like really nice. And he was like, this is great. And so I have this friend who studies New Guinea Highlanders. Okay. So New Guinea is one of the only places left. There's like 3 places that have like pretty close to true tribes that don't have a lot of technology. And, he's an anthropologist. Actually, no, he's an ecologist. He's studying Lex. He was studying birds. Okay. So he hangs out with these New Guinea tribesmen and they look at his feet and they're like, look at your like boots. Why do you wear those boots? And he looked at their feet and their feet are just these rugged leather. They can walk over hot coals and then just stand in them. Not like a fire walk, but like, yes, there's a coal here and I stand on them. They hike through the mountains in their bare feet and they look like hooves. And he takes off his feet and they all go, oh my God, put those boots back on. and he's like he has his like North Face tent and his like puffy jacket and his all his stuff, and he's sleeping in there. He's cold all night, and then and they're like, no, this is our home. We can sleep here. Don't bother us. We'll just do our thing. And he wakes up in the middle in the morning and looks outside, and they're all fast asleep, huddled up on the ground with no blanket or anything, and they're fine, and they're just passed out. And he's like, I just shivered all night. That's because these people were forged by the environment. They are those chicks who are punching through the eggs, and the environment gave them the abilities. They forged themselves through hormesis and became one with that environment. And he became the environment of the Columbia tent. And he is more rugged than I am. And I am more rugged than the guy who's a professional Netflix watcher.
So let's go back to Wim Hof here for a second, because in dealing with this idea that he's a genetic aberration and that therefore it doesn't apply to everybody.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
So then a doctor comes in, it's involved. And Wim makes this claim that he can consciously affect an unconscious process in the body. In other words, an autonomic process.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going
baloney.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you can. So he proved it. So what did they do? This was Pickers.
Yeah, Peter Pickers and Matthias Cox were the two PIs on the research study. Heard Wim's claim, and this is sort of the magical thing about Wim. Oftentimes, Wim spouts total, insane, and inaccurate claims. But this time, he said, I can control my immune system. And he went to these doctors and said, I can do it. I can turn off my immune system if I want to. And Pickers and Cox were like, no, you can't, bro. But they were interested in testing it because I guess it would be cool if he could,
mm-hmm.
right? So the first time they tested him, and what their specialty was testing things like cyclosporin, which are the anti-rejection drugs that you get if you have a kidney transplant. Your immune system will kill the kidney unless you suppress your immune system. So they had designed the test to test whether those drugs were effective or not. And the way they did it is they would inject you with a heat-killed bacteria of E. coli called endotoxin, which isn't dangerous, but it has the markers on its cell walls that will make your immune system go, hey, that's bad, and attack it. And what you get is a primary immune response, which is the fevers, the aches, the chills, the normal stuff you get with the flu. If the drug worked and suppressed the immune system, you would not get those fevers, aches, and chills because your immune system was effectively suppressed.
Just recognizes it as self.
Yeah, it's just
okay.
It's in a stupor. It's mm-hmm. in a stupor. It's like, oh, I don't even know, man. I just let it go. That's probably what it's more like. And so Wim said he could essentially get his immune system into the stupor state and not recognize these things. So what they did is they injected him with endotoxin, and he was alone in the first study, and he reported no major changes other than some minor headache stuff. In addition, when they did ex vivo studies where they looked at his blood in a petri dish, the blood also didn't respond to the endotoxin.
So there was some objective measure here. It wasn't all just his subjective report.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And there was a bunch of other hormonal things, and you can go read the paper. So that was interesting. And the question was Wim a freak? And the answer to that is yes, Wim is a freak, but can he teach it? And you just talk to Wim.
Which would prove that he's not an aberration. If he can get other people to do this, mm-hmm. well, if he is a genetic variant, those are pretty rare. So it's not likely he'll bring together 20 other people and they'll all have it too.
Right. Or what he could show is that maybe he is a genetic variation, but other people can still learn it. Like, it doesn't really matter. When you get the extra people, that's the study that we care about. Right, so right after I first met him in 2013, the week afterwards, he had, and I'm going to get the numbers wrong. It's been a while since I've seen the studies, but I believe it was 20 college students come and study his method. There was also a control group that was doing something else in Holland. I forget how they did the control. Maybe it was like yoga or something like that they were doing. And So they did what I did. They did the breathing, which is hyperventilation and holding your breath. And then they did the ice water immersion, which is relaxing in ice water. And they climbed up the mountain in their underpants, which is the underpants method. I don't know. And they did all of this stuff for a week. And then they go tested all of their blood in the lab. They injected all of them with endotoxin, and they all reported startlingly similar results. They were all able to turn off their immune response to endotoxin, which is frankly an amazing result. It is groundbreaking because what you're doing is saying that I can use these environmental techniques, a little bit of breath work, a little bit of mindset, and somehow that alters the way my immune system responds, which heretofore had not been, in my understanding, has never been proven in a lab before. And so that is the most wonderful and the best thing that Wim ever gave the world.
That's pretty amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So if we go back to the method again, to summarize the method, there's a breathing technique.
Mm-hmm.
There's cold exposure.
Mm-hmm.
But through all of this,
mm-hmm.
there's meditation.
Yeah.
Or mostly with the breathing.
No, so I think when we say meditation, again, we need to think about what meditation is from a big perspective.
Okay, because you have a natural tendency to want to shiver.
Yeah.
When we get cold,
mm-hmm.
so that the body will warm itself up because of that micro exercise, if you will.
Right.
But my understanding was that part of that meditation is to sort of consciously will yourself not to shiver, relax.
Yes.
You've got to relax. You got to just ease into this.
Yes.
This is okay, as you said before. This is okay.
Mm-hmm.
This is all right. I'm just
mm-hmm.
going to feel my way through it.
Yes.
Is that the purpose of the meditation? Otherwise, you send the process off course?
So the purpose of the meditation is to recognize that your body is giving a choice in terms of your anxiety levels, right? Is that anxiety is the anticipation of a negative outcome, right? So you ramp up your system to go fight the situation you're in. That's always a choice, right? And so the meditation is in the environment that you are in and you have created, is to say, this is a choice, and I will not do the automatic default program that my body is offering.
Wait a minute. You're saying we're taught that that's an autonomic thing.
Mm-hmm.
You get, before you can even think,
Yeah.
put together a plan,
mm-hmm.
your cortisol shoots up,
Mm-hmm.
heart rate increases,
Mm-hmm.
readying you for this, as you said, this fight or flight. You're saying that's a choice.
Always, yeah, 100% that's a choice. And the way we know it's a choice is, let's say you're on a cliff, right? But you were blindfolded and you had no idea you were on the edge of a cliff. Would you respond to the cliff, right? No, you had no idea that there was a danger there. It's only when you opened your eyes and then recognized the cliff, and then had a cognitive understanding that cliff could kill you, and then realized that you might actually get killed by that cliff. That's when. So there's these psychological processes that have to go on and occur before you get anxiety. And now we're interceding before that, and you're putting a wedge in between your anxiety and your response by willing yourself to say, it's okay. It's fine. I mean, think of it. We do this all the time. Have you ever sneezed? Yes, you've sneezed. Okay. You know that feeling of the sneeze when your nose is wrinkling up and there's those sensations there. And I don't know, is it pain? Is it tickling? I don't really, you can just use whatever word you want to describe it, but there are sensations in the sneeze. And you know that you can lean into the sneeze and let it go and have a great sneeze, which are sort of like orgasms. There's some brain patterns that are sort of like orgasms there. Or you can also say, I'm going to delay the sneeze. No, I want to sneeze now. And you can delay it. You might not be able to stop it, but you can delay it for a while. You are using the wedge.
Or somebody can delay it for you, which ticks me off.
Mm-hmm. Right. But you can intercede in these things. Same thing with it being ticklish. Same things about, again, an orgasm could be used like this. These autonomic processes offer sensations, and those sensations offer choices. And you have an ability to intercede with how you react to those sensations. Ice water is no different. And anxiety is even easier to intercede with because it's not the direct stimulus, it's the anticipation of the stimulus that you get in there. And with a shiver, the shiver, at some point, the shivering will overcome you in ice water. Okay. At some point, and for me, it's somewhere between 10 minutes and 30 minutes where I will get into the uncontrollable shivering. It depends on a lot of factors that go in there. But I don't shiver at first. because I know that it's fine and I can intercede well before that. And when it's starting to shiver, I can still say to myself, calm down and you're going to be okay. And then I can keep on pushing that limit to a certain point.
And that's what you mean by widening that wedge.
Yes. That conscious choice is the wedge that pushes between your sensory reactions coming from your brain and the environmental stimulus that's coming in from the outside. And it meets somewhere probably in the lower brainstem.
Okay. So you overcome these things, these tendencies to want to react differently as we're just accustomed to doing.
Mm-hmm.
What does that do for us?
So it depends who you ask. If you ask Wim, it fixes everything, right? There's nothing it can't do. But in my experience and from the research that I've, that's out there, what we have good scientific understanding for is anxiety, depression, pain, and autoimmune illness. Those are the things, and chronic illness in general. All of these things seem to be affected by this. So these are the things that have a subjective component, things that respond well to the placebo effect. So the placebo effect is like the most magical effect in medicine, right? And one way to think about the placebo effect, the simplest way, is like a doctor in a lab coat gives you a pill and says, this pill will make you better, even though the pill's a sugar pill. And somehow that results in you getting better. And we can go way deep. We can go way deep on the placebo effect. We'll just keep it surface for now.
Well, so if we go back to Wim, there's a really amazing thing to me, and when you bring it up in your book, it's a little bit later on, and I'm going, holy cow, he has a twin, and not only a twin, but an identical twin, who even better is a couch potato or does not have the same inclinations that Wim does for fitness and health mindedness. Mm-hmm. Would that be accurate to say?
Yeah, I've never met him, but I believe he's a truck driver, and he is not, Wim says he's not very fit. I've seen photos. That's about all I know about him personally. But yes, genetically identical to Wim, and they've run some twin studies.
Yeah, so which are hugely valuable in the medical world. You can kind of isolate things and say, all right, well, they're the same this way. So how is the environment impact? Because it's pretty isolated there. That's environment. So what did they find with him?
So one of the things, what they were studying in particular was the amount of brown fat that Wim has, and they wanted to see. So Wim was saying that he can go into the environment and create more brown fat by doing his technique. Okay,
let's back up just a little bit and define the brown fat. This what you call BAT, brown adipose tissue.
Correct. So brown adipose tissue, BAT. Brown fat, these are the three names for it, is a thermogenic tissue, which means it generates heat, and it looks just like fat jelly, okay? And it sits between your shoulders, and when you're born, you have a lot of it, and as you get older, you have less of it, and its job is to pull white fat from your system and burn it for heat energy.
A lot of it when you're born, probably because babies have more of a tendency to get cold.
Yeah. I like to think of babies as super weak, man. And they don't have the ability to warm themselves with their muscles. So they have to have this thermogenic property to keep them warm or they will die, which is why we incubate children who are premature, not only in cold countries, but even in India, even like all over the world, because they lose body heat so fast. So they need the brown fat to counteract that because they don't have the musculature, which is primarily how we heat ourselves here. Now, the cool thing about BAT is that if you use it, it's a different sort of mechanism to heat yourself, and its fuel is white fat, which we have a surplus of in this world. And so there has been so much research on brown fat in the sort of the anti-diabetes stuff, the idea for obesity in general. If we could activate that pathway, we're going to supercharge everyone. Everyone's going to be fit and thin, and everyone's going to look great on Instagram if we're able to do it. And they've been trying to develop a pharmaceutical that will activate brown fat for at least 30 years. But no one has. And so the promise was that Wim could build up BAT, and then you do his method and you get super trim and awesome, and then you look great on Instagram. So Wim, the twin study is so interesting because they measured against his brother, who is a couch potato, so he doesn't have those environmental inputs coming in, and they found no difference. They had the same amount of BAT. So,
and that blows me away. There goes that theory.
Yeah, which is fascinating, and I love this about. One, I love this about science because we can ask interesting questions and then we can refute them. And also, there's this myopic thing that we do in the world today, and I'm somewhat guilty of it, but other people are more guilty of it, where we say, this is the thing, the one thing that if we change, we're going to look great on Instagram. We're going to fix all of our cancer. We're going to do all of this stuff. And it's just one little tweak, and you can buy it really cheap from my company, right? That's what we want as in a world. We want an antibiotic, but for everything. And the thing about BAT is on a theoretical level, it's super, super fascinating. And Wim's abilities are proven empirically, which means we can do them. Like I climbed up Mt Kilimanjaro with Wim and it was -30 out and I was not dead. That's pretty amazing. Wim sits in the ice for a long period of time. I sit in the ice for a long period of time, and we can do it. So we know that it happens. We also know that there's an autoimmune benefit. We know that these things on an empirical level, but we don't necessarily know what the mechanism is. And so I write in What Doesn't Kill Us, BAT may not be the mechanism and the pathway that ultimately is the thing that's right. That's a hypothesis.
The hypothesis, but that was kind of the working theory, right?
Yeah.
Because what makes it brown is the presence of mitochondria. In fact, as far as I know, it's the only way that we know of that you can create new mitochondria is through hormesis.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Challenge. Yeah, that's my understanding because it tends to just go away, after we're babies. But that's awesome. You got brown fat, burning white fat, and great mix. But apparently that's not all there is to it.
Yeah. I mean, here's the thing. What if it's another metabolic pathway? What if there's a million? Our bodies are so infinitely complex. There's an imponderable number of connections and hormones and muscle systems and consciousness. All of this stuff is going on in our bodies. And we have the hubris of in science to say we can figure it out. And you know what? We ain't figured it out yet.
That's right. As soon as I hear somebody say, if I can just get this one thing, I just kind of stop listening at that point. Okay, you don't get it. It's not just one thing. It never is just one thing.
And science is really, science is not what I'm talking about. Pharmaceuticals and medicines are, they have to isolate variables, right? We want to know like how one variable works. Because if we isolate all the variables and factor everything out, we can identify how one thing works. And that's the idea of reductionism. And if we then just did that for every part of the body, the belief of reductionism is it all adds up to what we now have now. And then we can functionally determine how everything works. If we get down to the smallest things in the universe and add it all up, and it becomes a predictable model.
We'll just figure out all the little things, and then there'll be our big answer.
Yeah, and that's a theory, right? That's a standpoint. If that is possible, we ain't even close, right? We haven't even done the connectome of a fruit fly, which is like all of the neurons, brain structures of a fruit fly. We haven't figured out how every cell works in a fruit fly yet, and we've been working on that for like 50 years. How are you going to do a human and then think about all of the impacts internally and then all of the impacts externally? We don't have the science or the resources to isolate all those variables. B, if we did, we couldn't compute all those variables. And 3, it might not even be possible because maybe the variables themselves inherently change.
Yeah. Well, there you go. So there goes that theory, at least as a sole way of understanding. So the different ways you can generate heat.
Yes.
That would allow you to climb Kilimanjaro, which, by the way, you did shirtless.
I did.
And in shorts.
And I appeared in Playboy shirtless. Okay. In the magazine, I was shirtless in Playboy.
Bro, I'm just saying, probably not a big appeal for the readers. But what I want to know is how did you make it? How did you make it to the top with still fingers and toes and frankly nipples? I mean, what you got frostbite when you're talking about -30.
It's quick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So your core can only do so much to bring that outward. if you'll bear with me here.
Yeah.
So what happens there? I mean, how in the world do you, and then add wind.
Yeah. Well,
which you had.
It was -30 with the wind.
With the wind. Okay.
Just to be clear, I don't remember what the absolute temperature. It was -30 with wind. Nonetheless, super cold. And I will also add a caveat. There were a few times on the ascent that I put on a light sweater, which does, I guess, undermine my manliness a little bit.
A little bit of a windbreak.
It wasn't a windbreaker. It was a sweater. The wind went right through it. I made the error of not choosing a better sweater. But most of the time, I was truly shirtless on the ascent. And the way it works is, I mean, there's a couple things going on. I can talk about the physiology, and I can talk about a more spiritual bent on this.
Okay, so let's start on physiology. We talked about brown fat.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's a generating metabolic source,
Sure.
There's one.
Sure. Brown fat, and I actually don't think the brown fat was the important part. Maybe a little part. The other thing is I'm walking up a mountain.
Okay, yeah.
So literally I am burning things called carbohydrates on my way up the mountain, and that is generating heat by breaking those chemical bonds and doing the metabolic stuff with it.
With big muscle groups, right? So
and if I had stopped for a while, I know I'd get cold.
Which you did. You had to stop at and so what happened there at that stop?
So we stopped. It gets colder as you go. At bottom of Kilimanjaro, it's tropical, and it's the top. It's super cold, right? We stopped at. I think there was a lunch on the first day, and then in the afternoon we stopped at a pretty high point, and then we had a sleep, and we slept for 4 hours, I think, and then we proceeded onwards. In that stop, we did some more breath work because you want to. So the really interesting thing about Kilimanjaro wasn't the heat component. It was actually the altitude component. Is the fact that we were going up so fast that when I told the U.S. Army our plan, they said I think it was 90% of us would get altitude sickness based on their research, and the Dutch Mountaineering Association said we would all die.
Which was good research.
Yeah,
I mean that had been done extensively on.
Oh, we have lots of experience in knowing people who die.
Yeah,
like they're good. They're dialed right in. And what we were doing is we were hyperventilating the entire way up.
So just to restate Wim's goal there on in terms of the time that you were going to take to ascend.
He said 30 hours was his goal because there was a record we were going to beat. I have no idea what this record is because it certainly wasn't the fastest ascent of Mt Kilimanjaro, which I think was 2.5 hours by an ultra runner. And the reason the ultra runner could do it so fast is because altitude sickness does take a little while to kick in, and he was able to do it faster than the altitude sickness, right? And then, which is, just all this stuff is bananas. And for us, we said we were going to do it in 30 hours, which is definitely a deadly area to do it in.
And how many people in the party?
I think it was about 30.
And were there not some that were kind of sick?
2.
Okay.
I think one woman had to get taken down on our first major stop.
But I mean, going into it, weren't there like heart conditions and
heart conditions? We had a guy who had lupus, a person who had, I think, 2 people with Lyme, and one guy who was, I think, 76 years old.
So what they had done to prep for this was just Wim Hof Method, breathing, cold exposure, but not any altitude conditioning.
No, none. And they're from, most of them were Dutch. Most of them were from Holland, which, and I live in Denver, so I had like a 5,000 foot advantage.
Yeah.
Most people are from Holland, which is proper sea level.
Well, that's mind blowing.
Yes.
Well, another thing that I don't know how you explain that, but there he was with 30 other people besides himself.
Well, it's not unexplainable because what we were doing is, so as you ascend into higher altitudes, you have lower available oxygen. It's still the same percentage of oxygen, but the molecules are just more spread out. So when you breathe in, the air is literally thinner. All right. You just need more oxygen. So what we were doing is we were over breathing to bring in more oxygen. And you can actually notice this. This is actually really interesting. If you think about right now, what's the altitude at Salt Lake? Like 3,000? Is that about right?
Yeah, something like that.
So at Salt Lake, it's still...
Look that up.
So Salt Lake is a pretty rich atmosphere here. And if you think about, I'm going to hyperventilate for 28 hours, that would seem very, very difficult, right? Because you're actually moving in more molecules into your lungs and out of your lungs. It's more work. As you actually ascend, this was super cool. I didn't realize this until I was doing it. The breathing becomes easier because it's less resistance. So the natural thing that happens is you breathe more. And incidentally, this is also what Diamox does. So Diamox is the anti-altitude drug. It actually increases the respiratory rate and also makes you pee a lot because it just sort of does that passively. Essentially, what we were doing is saying we are Diamox, and we're just going to breathe a lot more as we go up, and we just counteracted the effects of that disperse oxygen gas by breathing more, and it works as long as you keep on doing it. And you can actually, it was cool because you have a pulse oximeter which can tell you what your O2 levels are, and usually you can't detect your O2 levels.
Okay, hang on. You got a pulse oximeter that you're using on digits that have had the circulation constricted.
No, but the circulation is not constricted.
No,
it's for hands are warm because you're moving. You're going.
Oh, because you're
up.
Moving. Okay.
But
when you're in the ice bath and doing the conditioning or the method,
yeah, they don't work. Pulse oximeters don't work well.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Good. That explains that. I was wondering about that.
Yeah, I wish they did. I've tried so often to like use my Oura ring and ice bath.
Yeah, and you're dead. You're dead. That's what the reading you're getting.
Totally dead. But so the pulse oximeter is great. So the human body does not detect oxygen levels. It does in a way, but we'll get to that later. You don't generally consciously detect oxygen levels when you breathe. It's the buildup of CO2 gas. Mm-hmm. So the oximeter is useful because it gives you a number and it reads it directly, the O2 levels. And as we go up, you know, normally a normal sea level human is about 99 O2, right? And you know, in Denver, it's about 97 O2 saturation.
Pulse oximeter, which you put on just the end of your finger. I'm trying to remember. People may not understand this terminology.
Sure, yeah, it's a little hug for your finger with a digital readout on the
hinged
top
on one end, and you just squeeze it apart and put it on there and wear it.
Yeah, and about 5 seconds after you put it on, it gives you a reading. And so as you go up, you can see your O2 saturation drop, and it will drop to, you know, it'll drop to 90. And then that's one thing, and then it will go to like 70 and 60. You're in trouble, and then like, you know, and you know, if you stayed at 60, you're on your way to death, right? It's not looking good. You've got some advanced COVID over there.
Yeah. So you had these criteria that you got from, where was it from?
The Lake Louise Protocol.
Yes, the Lake Louise Protocol. Where you agreed beforehand with your climbing buddy that should you get a high enough score, you will both turn around and go back.
Correct. Yes.
All right. And one of those was a pulse ox below.
No, I don't think the Lake Louise Protocol has a pulse ox thing. It's more symptomatic. I think it's like you have edema, you have several other symptoms,
nausea
headache,
and vomiting.
Yeah, I don't think it does an objective reading to it. It's more like if I have these three things, I'm turning around. I get a score and something like that. Now,
but you had a number that you were looking at, trying to keep it above.
Yeah.
What was that number?
I don't remember.
Okay.
But I will say, with the pulse oximeter, yes, above 90.
Above 90. Oh.
And so when we saw the numbers drop below, then you do start detecting lack of oxygen in the terms of like you get a little fuzzy and the sky literally darkens. So it's a blue sky, but like when my O2 was low, it was like I was wearing sunglasses. So I was like, oh, this is getting low. And those were signs to me that I should breathe heavy. And here was the cool thing. Once I started like that, then I'd get another reading and it would be like a 92. So I could use that extra over breathing to keep my O2 levels higher.
So you weren't necessarily doing that the whole way 100% of the time, that kind of breathing.
Yeah,
you were. Okay.
I was, yeah.
Wow. Seems fatiguing, seems exhausting. But I guess if the resistance decreases as you get higher, it's a little easier to do.
Yeah, it gets easier. It still was a lot of work.
So no lightheadedness really, like you feel from hyperventilation.
No, interesting that gets less, right? So if at sea level, it was a little bit more of that. And then as you got higher, that lightheadedness decreases because of the gas situation.
Okay. Wow.
Oh, but we didn't answer the BAT stuff. Okay. So as you get higher, what was making... So I was the only person who was like properly shirtless. Even Wim had a blanket over his shoulder and a t-shirt, still lightly clothed, but I was the least clothed of our whole group because I wanted to do it shirtless because this was like the icy breathy stuff that I'd been doing.
Scott the purist.
Yeah, right. I don't know why. So I went up and the thing about the interaction with the environment is one, as long as I'm moving, I'm generating heat and I'm keeping a positive attitude as I go, and I'm able, like, there's two options as you go up the mountain, right? You can fight the mountain. I'm going to grit my way up this mountain. Or I can be like, I'm going to connect to this environment and I'm going to be okay. It's like being in the ice bath and relaxing. Are you going to go full sympathetic fight or flight, or are you going to go rest and digest flow state? And it's a choice, right? And both choices might be viable, right? In America, we love grit. In America, we're like, hell yeah, grit. We're going to get across this desert. We're going to break my leg off as I do it. And I'm still going to get across this mountain. That's an American, right? And then we have the Kung Fu master, right? And the Kung Fu master goes, yes, but I am the mountain. And I chose the Kung Fu master idea. And I was like, no, I am not. And it's the cheesiest thing I've ever written in my life, which is, I am not on the mountain. I am the mountain. And I know it's cheesy. It's like a yoga poster and you're like, oh God, cringeworthy. But it actually really helped. It says, I am connected to this and those sensations are a part that's flowing through me and I am here. And the mountain is giving me a gift to come up it and it's permitting me. And I know it sounds zany and flighty, but in that moment it worked. And in that moment, I was okay. And I was going up this and I was working with the environment. And it was one of my many perspectives on consciousness in general, is that we're all connected and the world will take care of you if you let it. And that's shocking and like sort of spiritual voodoo stuff, but it's there and it's true and it worked for me.
Okay. But it can kill you too.
Sure. Yeah.
So, well, first of all, what's the altitude of Kilimanjaro?
18,000. And I didn't make it to the true summit. I made it to the point where we went up one side and we could look down the other, and it was to a place called Gilman's Point. And I think there was about 300 feet above me. We turned around because there was a mutiny in the group, because Wim Hof insanely, and this gets to some other stuff that we'll probably talk about, told us not to have lunch. And, usually you skip lunch, you're like, whatever, bro, like knuckle up, right? But when you're climbing a mountain, lunch is a really important meal. And he was like, we have to beat this record. We have to get 30 hours up to the top of the mountain. And like, no one cared about the record. And we're like, we just want to get up the mountain, man.
Well, no one cares except who was the first one to follow him?
Yeah, right. Well, me. Right. But I was angry at Wim because so we had all of our group and all of our guides were like, no, Wim, you're being irresponsible. You should not do this. Do not go up now. Give us 15 minutes to eat. And he was like, no, don't you challenge me, Scott. I'm going up this mountain. And I was like, God damn it, I have to write a book. I got the ending of the book. This is going to be the ending of the book. And I was like, I'm going to follow up. And like, I protested. I was like, I put on all of my clothes. I had a backpack. I was like, I'm going to put on my wind pants. I'm going to put on my sweater. I'm going to put on my green puffy jacket. And I'm going to go up and I'm going to hate you, Wim. And I was walking up behind him and he's like, oh, okay, easy does it. We'll do it. I'm like, we had a conversation. It was a little heart to heart on the mountain. And everyone else had said no. The buddy system, Wim just has it. And he has done this actually on multiple Kilimanjaro. There's another book called Kilimanjaro as Medicine. It was written by a Dutch writer. I don't know if it's in English. And it's also like Wim did the same thing to her. He was like, there's no ego. We go. And you're like, oh yes, when we're all together. And then boom, he sprints up the mountain. You're like, God, dude. Like, it's like within 5 minutes he does this.
That is not we go. That's you go.
And so I follow him up, right? And I'm having this cognitive dissonance here because Wim is this icy prophet, right? He showed me this thing and he did a lot of good things for me. Like Wim has been a huge influence in my life and I have so much gratitude towards him. And that's where I call him a prophet. He's also a freaking madman who should not be trusted at all. And when you're following him, when he does things all the time that hurt him in a number of ways and has the potential to hurt other people. And I'm following up here. I was like, what am I doing? And there's this moment in the book where it's like a half an hour after the group has mutinied, and I see him slip a little bit. Like, a foot slip. Like,
physically slip.
Physically. Yeah. Maybe his knee goes down to the ground. I don't know. It's something small, not a big deal. And I'm like, oh, I'm an idiot. Because Wim is just a dude, like I'm a dude, and we're just both going on this mountain, and I'm not following the madman up the mountain. I'm on the mountain myself, and I made these choices. And now with that, I like sort of forgive him on this mountain for his madness because he's in his own junk. And I was like, okay, I can do it. And then I didn't take off my wind pants. I took off all the stuff up top, and I was like, oh, all right, I can do this, and it's cool. And then I think we had someone had like one of those like medicinal gels you get on marathons, and I had that, and I was like, I can feel every carbohydrate in this medicinal gel, and
because I had no lunch.
Yeah, because I had no lunch. It was the best thing ever, and then we make it up to get to Gilman's Point, and at that point, the temperature there's just problems ascending to the next 300 feet. And we're like, okay, that's enough. And we turn around, but we take a great selfie at Gilman's Point, and it looks really great. And the people who stayed and had lunch made it up to the top.
They did.
Yeah, they did. They did like an hour or two later.
Okay,
yeah.
So which, as I recall, was still pretty close to the record. Because I think you guys beat it by what, an hour and 26 minutes or something?
Yeah, it was like, I think we made it in 28 hours and 30 hours was the goal. And like, who cares? Because it wasn't the actual record.
So what must have been going through your mind was, okay, this is not a prophet without unfulfilled prophecies. This is the man whose corneas froze once.
Yeah.
Tell us about that. When he misjudged. I mean, the method worked, but something else failed. But you didn't run out of breath, right?
No, we have to actually talk about this we have to get into this in a slightly different way.
Yeah, because this is fascinating,
and this is important. Okay, so the Wim Hof Method is hyperventilating and holding your breath. Okay, essentially, and getting into ice water and relaxing. Now, those two things have to be practiced separately. To repeat, never, ever, under any circumstances, hyperventilate in water. Okay? This is a problem with the way Wim Hof teaches. Like, there's warnings on his website.
Hang on. Because?
Oh, yes. Because when you hyperventilate in water, remember your body detects CO2, which is the buildup of the gas that when it builds up, as it builds up, you feel the urge to gasp more and more and more. So that when you feel like you're going to pop, that means because you have a lot of CO2. You do not detect the depleting of oxygen. So if you hyperventilate a lot, the reason why you're able to hold your breath with the Wim Hof method is because you've tricked your body. And it's like if you're cooking and there's your eggs and there's smoke coming up and you're like, alarm, you shouldn't be going off. I know I'm not going to burn this down. And you take the battery out of the alarm. That's what Wim Hof method is doing. So sure, you can still cook your eggs. But then if you walk away from your eggs and they actually do catch fire, your house burns down. Okay. So the problem with the Wim Hof method is if you hyperventilate, and you're on dry land and you're lying down doing the method the way we usually do the method, and you hyperventilate, you hold your breath, and you've taken the battery out of the alarm, you might pass out. And if you pass out, then your body resets and it's like, okay, well, take a breath, and then you wake up. Great. Totally fine on land.
It's your body's way of saying you will breathe.
Yes. Yeah.
If I have to do this to you, you're going to breathe.
Yes. It protects you.
Except
if you're in
humans
water.
Humans don't do that well when they're underwater.
Because we're not fish. And so when you do this in water, you get something called shallow water blackout. And many, many people have died of shallow water blackout over the years. And it's not only doing the Wim Hof method, but like really fit swimmers who are just exerting themselves and hyperventilating while they're swimming will die of shallow water blackout. 2 Navy SEALs died because they were underwater pushing themselves in the water, and as they hyperventilate, as they were under there, they just died of the shallow water blackout. In the Wim Hof method, we have many news reports of people dying of shallow water blackout because they've hyperventilated and passed out in the water. So from news reports that are out there, we have found about 11 suspicious deaths of Wim Hof method practitioners who have died in water. And we assume from these news reports that they died of shallow water blackout. And, obviously there are some limitations because if there was a witness watching them drown and hyperventilate, they might have been rescued. So there is a little bit of wiggle room here to maybe they weren't, but it seems very, very likely that these individuals have died because they have conflated the idea of free diving with the Wim Hof method. And it seems obvious, right? Because hey, if I can hold my breath longer, shouldn't I be able to do this in water? Doesn't that make sort of like an intuitive sense? And here is where the Wim's records really become a problem. With one of the things that Wim is best known for is the longest swim under sea ice, which a record that's actually since been broken. And what he did, and I want to think that this was I think it's around 2005-ish when this occurred. Discovery Channel was there with him, and there were 3 ice holes. The one where he started in, there's one at a midpoint and one at the record level. And they were going to do a test dive just to see how it goes on the first day and see if all the cameras were right and blah, 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 all the protocols. And Wim was like, yeah, I'm going to do it. And he wanted to impress all of the divers and everyone there. He wanted to impress them with his great abilities. He was going to break the record first. And even though...
So this is seawater.
It was either sea or lake water. It was water.
Because if it was seawater, it could have been potentially even colder.
Yeah,
right?
I'm not sure.
Anyway, okay.
I'm not sure. I've said both. I've said both sea and lake water, and sometimes when I think of the photos of what was up and above, I remember pine trees right behind him. So it might have been in a lake, but I don't know for sure. So he goes down. And Marcel Hoff, who is his brother, I've actually was a witness to this event. I've interviewed him recently to see what was going on. And Wim hyperventilates before he goes in.
Which he always does.
Which is a very bad and dangerous thing to do. Everyone say it with me. It's very bad and dangerous to hyperventilate in water. Okay, so he hyperventilates and he dives into the water and he's like, I'm going to do it first. And he swims and then he claims that his corneas froze over in the water and then he couldn't see and he missed the hole and he got confused of where he was going. And then a rescue driver who I guess activated quickly,
apparently
grabbed him and gave him supplemental oxygen. And then Wim woke up and then he survived. Now, here's the thing. Wim claims that his corneas froze over in water and that it was blindness that made him not work. Now,
made him not be able to find the hole.
Not be able to find the hole. But it might have also been that he had shallow water blackout, right? He reached his limit. He'd hyperventilated, and then I'm not Wim. I wasn't there, but I am not entirely even certain if corneas can freeze in water.
Yeah, I wondered that.
Because to me the word freeze implies below 32, and water, if it's liquid, is above 32. So
unless it's salt water.
Yeah, unless it's salt water, which then, yeah, there's questions here.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to this for sure.
And what is the cornea like after it thaws when it freezes like that? Is it damaged?
Yeah.
I wondered these things.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of questions here, and I actually don't have an answer. I'm just positing a question here. Marcel witnessed him hyperventilate beforehand, and Wim did go on to break the record the next day. So he actually did do his feat. But here's the real problem with the Wim Hof method and the way it is taught and the way everyone, even though there's warnings on these websites, there's a lot of conflation between the idea that you should be doing his breath work in the water. Like doing this breathing, what makes you more resilient to the cold, people think. Well, physiologically, it doesn't. Actually, it makes you more cold. And these two things are supposed to be worked separately so that you can learn that mindset piece. What I call the wedge, what Wim calls mindset, it's about training your body to push against stimulus. So there's this psychological tool that we earn as we do this. And it's not a heating method. And it's not a free diving method. It's about looking inside.
Okay, it's not a free diving method, but it does... Like as you do this, and inexperienced people, I mean, you talked about this the first time you went over there and met him, you very quickly were able to hold your breath longer within one session.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So there is some benefit that you get fairly quickly.
Oh, it works.
Holding your breath.
Yeah.
But you're saying it's not a heat generating thing. So why do it?
Well, the thing is that when you're swimming, and we can get into some sort of more technical respiratory details here. So if you want to hold your breath the maximum amount of time vis-a-vis the Wim Hof method, you hyperventilate and then you take a full lung inhale. And what that's going to do is you've artificially lowered your CO2 levels in your body, right? And then you have a huge volume of gas in your lungs. And that makes your alarm bells take a lot longer to go off. In fact, it'll take so long that you will not detect the stimulation to pass out before you pass out. And that's the danger. And this is just in general the problem with these freediving people is, not all of them are under ice. Obviously, ice is another problem because it's hard to break through the ice, right? But if you're in water and you're just swimming underneath and you've done your hyperventilation, you want to get across the pool and you go across once and you're like, oh, I can still do it. I'll turn back. And then you won't realize that you're running out of oxygen because you don't have the sensations that we're used to saying, oh my God, I'm running out of oxygen. I'm going to pop. You have just I can do it. I can do it. I can do it. I can do it. Boom, you're passed out.
The blackout comes before you consciously know it.
Exactly. And that's why this is so unbelievably dangerous. This is why we have news reports of 11 people who are associated with the Wim Hof Method who have drowned in shallow water blackouts. And I'm going to note the chances that a news report gets generated and then includes the keywords Wim Hof Method and drowning is lower than the likelihood of someone just drowning and not getting a news report around them. So it's probably more incidents out there.
Were these independent cases or some of them groups? Do you know?
I think there was one pair of people who did it together and both drowned in Holland in 2012, which is actually not even included in my report because I couldn't find the original news report because it's archived or whatever. But most of them are individuals who are doing it. And there's a guy named Hamish Jameson in New Zealand. And here's the other thing, like when Wim was small and he had like 10,000 followers on Insta tubes, whatever, it was a less of a big problem, right?
I'm not familiar with the InstaTube.
But when he had like a few people following him and a few people make this mistake,
right.
it's going to be fewer incidences. So what we're seeing now is that there's in 2022, in my research, I think we had 4 deaths. Okay. And we have 11 in total going back to 2015. So we're seeing an increase in the number of people dying who generate news reports or like our fractioned data set. And it's because his follower count is increasing. And he needs to be incredibly clearer than just a warning on his website. He needs to never teach his breathing methods in the water. He needs to not show his swimming under the ice and saying, hold your breath as I swim under the ice, which I've seen him do in events. And in Los Angeles in 2018, I was in an event where he was like, all right, everyone, hyperventilate. And now I'm going to swim under the ice. And they played the video of him swimming under the ice and hold your breath as I do it. And so he's teaching that water and breath work are mixed. And this is a really, really important problem. And it gets more of a problem the more famous that Wim gets. This is the way we rate pharmaceuticals, right? A few people, we want to be sure that this pharmaceutical is safe for everyone as possible. So it needs to get safer and safer and safer the more people who take the drug.
Yeah. That's what I call the final clinical trial.
Yeah. And I think the final clinical trial for the Wim Hof method, hey, it works for autoimmune stuff. It works. I love it. I practice it every day. But this conflation of water and breath work is such a problem. And it's so easy to avoid. It's so easy to avoid to like bang on this drum to be like, it doesn't matter if Wim made a record by doing something stupid. You should not do something stupid.
Yeah. When that's the end, that's terribly unforgiving. Mm-hmm. Is it not? You don't recover from that. Which to me, I don't know why anybody would swim underneath an ice cap
at all. Like, what's the point? Like, and this is the thing what I was saying about intelligent risks, right? And this was in Wim's clown phase. This was before his method became articulated. He was doing stunts, and stunts honestly aren't impressive to me. I don't care that he could hang from a balloon with one finger. Who cares? Who cares that you can hold your breath for I don't care how long you can hold your breath. I don't care how long you can sit in an ice bath. The reason why we do ice bathing is not to become better ice bathers, right? It's to become better people. It's to become more resilient in our environment with our anxiety, with these autoimmune things. That is the goal. It's not this sort of and this macho side of the Wim Hof method. If we see this, if you look at my book cover, right? The book cover is this swole dude, right, getting into ice with a big beard. And we've seen this man on Instagram a million times. At least my feed, it's like hyper focused towards buff dudes who are getting into ice water. We've seen this image and it looks macho.
Looks like something to aspire to.
Yeah, but it's dumb. The image is dumb because this is really about an internal change. And I really want to de-macho-fy the Wim Hof method because, again, I don't care if you can ice bathe better than me.
Dictionary for that term, Jordan. De-macho-fy.
Well, I'm dropping words here.
Oh, man, you're on a roll here. Well, so that kind of brings us to kind of full circle here. The average Jane and Joe out there, what do they look for out of this? We haven't even talked about heat and that part of hormesis, which is another area that has some pretty good data on what it can do for you. Again, sort of exposing yourself again to your environment and not protecting yourself all the time from it. But in terms of the cold, what is it that the average guy takes from it?
So it's a big mental component, right? I think for me, and again, I come in at the level of sensation. That's where I'm most interested. I don't care that my biomarkers change when I jump into ice water. What I care about is that I get in there and then I feel great afterwards, and that I have it helps control anxiety. It makes just the day better. It makes me feel better, and the autoimmune illness that I used to have goes away, which is my autoimmune illness was super lame. It was canker sores. I would get like these dime-sized canker sores in my mouth probably once every month, and they last about a week.
I don't think that's lame at all. Those are painful.
They're super painful, but it's not Crohn's disease, right? Okay, let's just put these things in perspective. But I started doing the Wim Hof method, not thinking about my canker sores, and they disappeared. And that was like awesome. That was great.
There's been massive growth in autoimmune conditions. There's no question about that.
Mm-hmm.
There's the weight component of it that everybody can benefit from, which then by extension affects insulin resistance, improvements in those kind of metrics, which are just metabolic syndrome is terrible. I mean, it's what's killing us.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
So that, and then, so you say you feel better. You feel a lot better. Mm-hmm. So there's a release of, adrenaline, we know, but endorphins, I suspect, things that, do those stick with you?
For about a day. Yeah.
Well, that's okay. There's your daily dose of antidepressant you've just replaced.
And I think, there's also some chemoreceptor rewiring that occurs. So after What Doesn't Kill Us, I did this follow-up book called The Wedge, which is in many ways more interesting than What Doesn't Kill Us, because What Doesn't Kill Us is like, what does cold and breathing do for us? And I look at Wim, I look at Laird Hamilton, I look at the army. Like there's a couple scenes in the book. Whereas The Wedge, I really get deeper into this concept of getting between the environment and your internal stimuli. And I look at 10 different things, right? So I don't really do much about cold and breath work. I do a little bit of breath work in it, but I look at fear. I look at heat. I look at MDMA assisted therapy. There's an ayahuasca event in it. And I'm really just sort of building on the ways that we can find external stimulus and jump into these stimulus and then change the way we work. Oh, I'm also like with Andrew Huberman in his shark lab. He has a virtual shark lab, which is sort of cool. So I'm playing with the way that we alter the environment. It triggers a sensation in our bodies. And then that sensation gives us a choice to change things. So in the sauna, I did I think it was a 4-hour sauna in Latvia. And it was with my wife. And it was sort of in a more traditional situation than what you might do at a hotel, right? We had two essentially garden gnomes hitting us with birch branches this whole time and giving us like weird teas. It's a crazy experience. But what we're doing here, and we're both naked. Me and my wife are naked. We have these garden gnomes slapping us with stuff, and we're eating weird foods, and they're slapping us with the stuff that we're eating. Okay, and I know that all sounds bizarre, and it was magical and awesome. And then we dunk into cold water, and then we come back in. And here's the really cool thing is after we're getting all these sensory inputs through multiple pathways, smells, sounds, taste, sensation, and we're in a very high heat environment. And I think it was not the hottest sauna. I think it was about 180 most of the time, but maybe up to 200 for a little bit, and then coming back down. What essentially happened is my sensory system started confusing things, and I would start tasting sounds, and I would start seeing sensations, and seeing like touch sensations. Wow. And we had this mixing in my brain of various environmental inputs through different sensory pathways, and it was really, really interesting to be able to do that. And I think that there's something about resilience that allows you to experience the world through multiple pathways, and that confusion was pretty cool. It was great. And it was like for at least 4 hours with my wife and I in the sauna with these garden gnomes hitting us with things with felt hats on. It was cool.
With felt hats on. Oh boy. Okay. So I think it's probably wise to mention that you really ought to be medically cleared to do some of these things. I'm not sure everybody could do well for 4 hours at that temperature.
Yeah, I don't know. Obviously, my lawyers are like, always tell people to talk to doctors first. So yeah, talk to your doctor first. I will say there's something really interesting about the sensory experience with a guide in a sauna. So what they would do is, as we're lying down on these benches and we have they're beating us with things, they're also putting cold water on us at times.
Oh, so it wasn't a solid 4 hours in the sauna.
It was mostly in the sauna, but there were some moments where we would go into a cold plunge, and there were things going on. Okay, there was lots of and there were bells. I mean, it was weird. And there was a dance. Anyway, one of the things that I noticed that they would do, and this is actually a really interesting question about consciousness. How do I know you feel what I feel? Okay, this is a deep question that philosophers have been asking for a long time. It's like, how do I even know you're conscious? How do I know that I'm just not my brain inventing all of these things? This is the mind-only school of Buddhism, and there's Plato and Aristotle played with these questions as well. Socrates. One thing about touch and physicality, which is so fascinating, is that if I am in a sauna and you're in a sauna, and it's 180 degrees, and your bodies are heating up, and this shaman is doing stuff, and if they want to know how I feel, because they want to keep me below the threshold of intolerance, because and they do that by then hitting you with some cold water. They'll put some cold water on your face, and they want to keep you right below that threshold of danger. The way they do it is they'll put their hand on my body, and if my body feels significantly hotter than their hand, the relative measure suggests that I feel hotter in my own body than what they're feeling right now, and they'll know that they have to go then modulate my body through a water immersion or something like that. And that's fascinating, right?
Well, it is. This is more of the same. It's more of a return to environmental stimuli that then your body will do useful things with. Mm-hmm. And one of them would be that just antidepressant. They're starting to come to mind a lot for me now, the the benefits that can come from returning to, or I should say, discontinuing the practice of environmental isolation, I guess, for another lack of a better way to say it.
100%. We are atomized in the modern world. Not only and it's been going on for a while, but I think that the real instigating event was probably 1907-ish when we introduced the electric light bulb, where all of a sudden darkness is gone. Darkness was a thing that we experienced for millennia. And now all of a sudden the sun doesn't matter to how, and obviously light changes so much physiologically in us. It resets our circadian rhythm. It pumps us up, and we are designed to have like, wake up in the morning, slow increase in light, broad at noon, and then down. And we do not have that cycle anymore. And then the reason that was done is Edison created the light bulb, and he created a new filament, and that went live in like 1908-ish. And then he did that in order to add more productive work hours in the day. So now all of a sudden, now we're working more, and we've started becoming defined by our work. We've started getting out of. We had nuclear families in America where, the parents lived in the house and the children lived in the house. And then when you married off, you lived in the town you were in, and you had things called communities. I don't know. Do you remember these things called communities? Because not really. And then you'd know your neighbors, and they'd help you with your kids. And like there was a thing that came up where people hung out together. Now we move to a new house. We leave our parents' house. We go to another town in search of work. And then we don't talk to our neighbors because neighbors are scary. And then we arm ourselves. And then we do all of these things to isolate ourselves from not only the natural world, but also the social world. Also, all of the things that create sanity in our body. That sanity also triggers anxiety. Like it modulates anxiety and depression because we're social beings. We're meant to be in herds and communities and tribes and whatnot. And how many people feel anomie, which is the Durkheim's word meaning social isolation? How many people feel this sense of disconnectedness right now? It advances even more when we get to social media, and now we care about likes more than we care about conversation.
Yeah, that's social media and a pandemic, and just multiply it even more, and then make it worse by modifying that light to make it now resemble sunlight, much more than say the light of a candle, which further confuses the mind and the whole system. Anyway, so I hear you saying modulate a lot, and it takes me to the word homeostasis, which sounds like is what we're after here. Yes. The body's ability to achieve that and maintain it, so that, and it's a very natural response to there's this extreme.
Yeah.
Now it's gone.
Yeah.
And now there's this one, and now it's gone. And here's the thing I'm teaching you. You can handle all of them. And so.
Until you can't.
Until you can't, or you stop. You just stop with that, shall we say, education process,
right? Ongoing
education process.
Yeah,
fascinating stuff.
Imagine the person whose life is defined, and we'll create a caricature here. They have a perfect apartment. They're in COVID, and they have a couch and they have a Netflix account. And they don't ever go outside, and they just watch Netflix, and Netflix is great. And they play on their computer, and their environment is so unbelievably narrow that when they go out for a walk and go to the grocery store, all of a sudden that stimulus is anxiety inducing because they haven't had that stimulus very much. And then they go outside and they're like, oh, and we've seen this over and over again with COVID, right? Where people are like, oh my God, people. And that progressive narrowing, we can choose whatever we want to do with our lives, right? You have the freedom. If you want to be the Netflix couch potato, ain't nothing stopping you. You're like, God bless you. If that's what you want to do, God bless you. Go be a Netflix couch potato. However, do you want to be defined? If you are defined by the things you do in life, do you want to be defined by a narrow range or a wide range? And that's your only choice in this world, ultimately. Do you want to do a lot of things, or do you want to do a little things? And if you want to do a lot of things, if you want to be comfortable in a lot of environments, you got to do the things. You got to go crack that eggshell, and you got to get out of your little egg, you little birdie, and go live life. And that means putting yourself in situations that can be uncomfortable, and make smart decisions when you do it.
Yep. If you choose all those little things, then you have a lot of crises. Because everything that comes at you is a much bigger thing than what it truly really is.
100%. You don't mind going to the grocery store anymore. Like you don't mind, and I think I benefited a lot from, I had a sort of intense 20s, where I was dealing with death sort of right in front of me on a regular basis. And I think that has given me a very wide range to deal with things because I know what's coming. I've seen it.
You've had an unusual exposure to such things.
Yeah.
I think.
for better or worse. Ultimately, I think it's maybe better, but it was traumatic at various times. My first book was on organ trafficking. All of my characters died. And I think that being exposed to those ultimate limits is very, very useful for personal growth.
So before we part ways here, Scott, tell us a little bit about what you're doing, like right now. What takes up your time these days?
Yeah, so I'm doing two things. One, I'm putting a lot of effort into my YouTube channel, and I have a related podcast that goes into sort of more depth, the things that I work on.
Scott Carney Investigates.
Scott Carney Investigates is the podcast, and the YouTube channel is, I don't know, it's like Scott's Thoughts or something. I don't know. I don't remember what I called it.
That's a new one? That's a new channel?
No, it's my main channel. It's like the Scott Carney one. Yeah. And then I do, but what my actual big goal is, I always have a big project. These are sort of small ball projects. My big project is on napping, because I've done so much work on the high states, the fight or flight states, and how to modulate. Now I'm looking into what happens when we drop into the lower states, where you really go deep into rest and digest. And what I'm thinking, the way I'm framing it in my mind right now, is how to go deep and wide, how to get into your dreams, how to implant dreams, how to get the most restorative rest possible. And ultimately, the goal is to have people take more naps, because naps are amazing. They are a superpower. They regenerate your cells. They can make you more emotionally resilient, and everyone loves them who does them.
Oh yeah, who doesn't want another nap? What's interesting to me that you focus on nap, not sleeping in general.
Yeah, the reason that's a good point. To talk about napping, you also have to talk about sleeping, obviously, because they're similar states. The thing is that napping is more efficient than sleeping in terms of restoration, because evolutionarily, if you look at the Hadza and the New Guinea Highlanders and the Zande, and we don't have a lot of anthropological examples of people who are sort of out of nature. There's only like a few tribes that we can really study, and they all take naps at 3 p.m. And it's because of our circadian rhythms. We have napping cultures. We have siestas, and like actually the Spanish, like the Eskimos in snow, the Spanish have like 8 names for naps and different types of naps. And these things maybe you've heard the expression, only mad dogs and Englishmen are out in the noonday sun. And
an Englishman.
And you think of it, this colonial pith-helmeted sunburned dude on the, in a colony somewhere, just working too hard. And we have this madness and this guilt around naps. Naps are lazy, and we want to work ourselves to the bone, when in reality, they will make you more efficient. They will make you better emotionally relating to people. They will give you more energy to do more creative work, and they are an awesome superpower. So the goal is to design 2 different ways to nap. A guided nap, which is related to yoga nidra, which you've probably heard about in like sort of the Huberman podcast about, and also just the nap, just lying down and letting your body restore itself over short periods. I mean, you can do a 20-minute nap and it just does wonders for you. And so I'm really excited about that project.
So this will be a book.
It'll be a book, a short book.
Okay.
A nap size book.
Nap size book.
Yeah.
Awesome. So what? Napping, the new superpower?
Yeah.
Got a title yet?
I'm working on the title. I believe it's going to call The Power of Naps.
Oh, that's good. I like it.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, we'll watch for it. How long do you think before you're publishing?
I'm guessing in the fall. I ran a Kickstarter that was successful to sort of cover my expenses for it. And I'm looking at like a fall release, probably September, October. I've written 2/3 of it. And it's only going to be like a 100-page book. So it's going to be out there. It's going to be a nap size book that you can read. And then and you don't even have to read it. You just need to look at it and say, hey, I should nap. And then I've won. I'm the worst capitalist.
Can I just have a nap with it open on my chest?
Yeah. That'd be awesome.
I got it. Cool. All right. We'll look for that. Thank you. Well, Scott, this has been a fascinating little amble down an interesting road.
Yeah, I love these conversations. It brings us back to community.
Yes, it does. Yeah, it's been great. Thank you so much for just kind of letting it flow and pouring it out there. And I feel like we've tied it into really the benefits and what's behind this for people. It's not just about daredevilism and impressing others, but there's some deep connections here. Really
the
deep.
flash is irrelevant, honestly. I don't care how many Instagram followers, some Institute followers people have. It's really about that self experience. That's the vital force. So that's the most important thing here.
Yeah. So you have a number of books. So what we've talked about, and I'm really glad we talked about the what doesn't kill us, because I really feel like if somebody just jumps into the Wedge, they're not going to appreciate it without that. But having gone through what we just did here, at least for me, it was that way. But a number of books that you've written there, and if the others, which I'm sorry to say I haven't yet read, are in as much depth and thoughtfulness as what you put into What Doesn't Kill Us, they'll be good reads.
It's funny. I find when I think about What Doesn't Kill Us, I think it's my lightest book.
Really,
in a lot of ways,
and yet it's done the best. New York Times Best Seller.
Yeah.
You should mention.
Yeah. It sold a bunch of books. The thing about What Doesn't Kill Us is it's actually weirdly narrow. There's a lot of good messages, a lot of good philosophy, a lot of good techniques you can learn in it. But it's sort of shallow because of some of those techniques. And when you look at a book like The Wedge, we're really going to get deep into your physiology, and they can be read in either order. And neither book is actually the first book in that series. It's a 3-book series. And the first book is this one. It's called The Enlightenment Trap, which is not what you would expect. It's the reason why when I went to Wim Hof, why it was an interesting thing for me to change my mind about.
Yeah, I see the connection between them for sure. So those will be on my webpage, which you can access through my bio. Under Lane's Likes, you'll see those books listed there. So I urge you to buy them for an even deeper, foray into this very, very interesting subject. So,
yeah,
Scott Carney, thank you.
Loved being here. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.